Happy New Year, Happy New Year, Happy New Year, Happy New Year. Oh wait, this is the first year I'm going to have to be a proper adult and I don't have to rely on a schooling system to keep me in check. Sad New Year. Hey guys, it's Amy here, back again with another video. Happy 2022! Well, actually, I don't really know if it's gonna actually be New Year by the time this comes out because time zones. When this video comes out where I live, it will be the New Year, but in other countries like UK and US, which I think most of my audience comes from, that's a completely different story. So I hope you will have a happy New Year. As has been a tradition for the past couple of years, my first video of the new year is usually of ranking the books that I have read the previous year. This is gonna be the last time that I'm gonna be doing it yearly. From here on out, because I'm reading a lot more books now than I used to, I'm instead gonna be doing this seasonally. So at the end of every season, or like the start of the next season, I'm going to be doing a TBR for the books I read that particular season, because it looks like I'm going to be reading on average about 12 books per quarter with the goals that I am setting for next year. So this is going to be the last time it's going to be happening in a year, and then next time you're going to be seeing a video like this is going to be the first video of March, where I'm going to be doing my summer to be read. Before I forget, I'm going to quickly go over that now. Deadly Education by Naomi Novik, The Toll by Neil Shusterman, The Magician of Hode by Margaret Mahy, The Old Curiosity Shop, I forgot who the author was. It's an ebook on my DS and I can't be bothered getting it out. I Am Mercy by Mandy Lynn, The Liminal Space by Jackie McCrae, Beyond the Black Door by A.M. Strickland, and Oliver Twist. I have decided also that from here on out, if I ever do not finish a book, I'm going to reread a book in its place. And with that out of the way, we are now going into the 25 books that I reviewed this year. This year was very interesting because there were some absolutely terrible books, but then also some absolutely incredible ones. So, number 25, Realm of the Gods by Tamora Pierce. Biggest disappointment in my life. This series, which I had read most of in 2020, I believe, it wasn't a bad series. It definitely had its flaws, and the first book was very, very strong. It just wasn't something I was personally into. They had to just finish it in the worst way possible. The final book in the series was MacGuffin Quest, but without the actual MacGuffin in it. They literally just like traveled through this magical world just to get out of it, and Dane, the main character, she does not get any powers out of it. She's just like traveling through this world, learning where she comes from, and it's kind of cool, but she doesn't learn anything properly insightful to help her out when she returns. And let's not forget the romance that blossomed forth. That was literally so disgusting. Number 24 is Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. People, when they kept on reading this book and recommended it, they kept on saying that it took them a few tries to get into the writing style of this particular book. Do not bother. The book was basically unreadable for me. If my memory serves me correctly, this took between 2 and 3 months for me to completely read this book. Sometimes it was because I only had the capacity to read a single chapter in one day because the writing style would literally give me headaches. Other days it was me procrastinating from reading because I did not want to deal with this pain of being like somewhat hooked but still like in pain. The only reason I put this above Realm of the Gods was because I decided to watch the TV series that was based off this book, and it was actually a really good story. Why was it written in such a terrible way? Number 23, City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. You can already see me fuming, can't you? You should like never say that your own book is the better version of another, but I genuinely think Aster's Coder Exposure is the better version by a landslide of City of Bones. It's incredible how much was the same, but like how bad it was written in City of Bones. Both novels do have a red-headed protagonist, but this one in City of Bones literally is a plot vessel that does nothing except witness everything that goes on around her, and yet somehow is credited for being so brave and so powerful when all she did was be there. And the plot twist that they literally stole from Star Wars and did dirty. It was so cheap. that I literally laughed out loud when this big dramatic plot twist came about, which my friend who has seen the Shadowhunters TV series informed me gets reversed later on. What was the fucking point? You cannot reverse a major plot twist like that. That is so freaking stupid. I probably would have rated that novel like 2.5 at a minimum if it wasn't for Star Wars fake plot twist thing that makes me put it at the lower end of 2 stars. Like the other books would be like 2.4 stars, 2.2 stars. This is 2.000000001 stars. Number 22 is Warlight by Michael Ondaatje. Similar to Catch-22, I did not understand what the point of the novel was. It darted off in many different directions and a lot of anecdotal little chapters which probably would have served better as just a collection of short stories. But somehow they tried to construct a narrative out of this that didn't make sense. To this day, the whole point of the novel confuses me. I don't know what the narrative was. Nothing felt very satisfying about the ending because I didn't feel like I read a story. It just felt very confusing. It was written nice. That's probably what gave it 2 stars in the end. But this book is very disappointing, and I feel like I'm gonna forget this book even existed in 5 years' time, or at least until I decide to rewatch this video. Number 21 is Percy Jackson and the Greek Heroes by Rick Riordan. What? A Rick Riordan book rated so low? Amy Rosenfeld, what happened to you? I questioned myself when this came up. But here's the thing. The Percy Jackson universe and the core Rick Riordan's books, it does have the modern takes and the comedic aspects of it, but it still has like a lot of really heart-wrenching and meaningful moments in the mix of it. What Riordan did with these retellings of Greek hero tales, they completely removed the heart out of it, and all that's left is just the comedic and modern world building that felt very clunky. For reference, Riordan turned Orpheus into a douchebag with a guitar. Like, anybody who's at least seen Hadestown or listened to the Hadestown soundtrack knows that Orpheus is not a douchebag with a guitar. Nothing in this world was enriched. This is a fake Percy Jackson book. I am not counting it as canon just because of how far it is from the core of the Heroes of Olympus and the Percy Jackson series. Number 20 is Dead Until Dark by Charlaine Harris. Technically, I finished this book on the very last day of 2020, but I reviewed it in 2021, my first review of 2021, so it goes into here. I can credit this series for being woke for its time, but that's about all I can credit it for. There were really a lot of things I didn't like in this novel. A lot of tropes that weren't my cup of tea. The protagonist, Sookie, was pretty whiny. The vampire boyfriend that she ended up having was very, very predatory. I do not stand for anything like that ever. Predatory vampire boyfriends are not hot, they are not sexy. But it's just on the higher end because it was quite a cohesive story. Number 19 is Dark Passage by MJ Putney. The most average book I have read ever. Dialogue was used to an over-excruciating amount. The world building and magic system seemed to be at the advantage of the protagonists way too much. Like, there were barely any rules established with what the abilities were. And the romance subplot was straight up pathetic. I can, however, say that one character was written extremely well. 1 out of a possible 7 main characters. This book was perfectly balanced, as no book should ever be. It's such a shame that I thought this series was going to be promising when I finished that book at the end of 2019, the first book in this series, Dark Mirror. Number 18 is Dark Destiny by MJ Putney. Oh look, the final book in the trilogy, and it suffers basically the same problems. The only reason that I put this book above the other was for like 1/9 of the book. There was like this really interesting story. It was about a Jewish girl who had recently escaped from Nazi-infested France, and about them going into this British country school and trying to fit in and seeing all the people around her accepting her and loving her for being her smart, feminist Jewish self. They were scenes that were so incredibly endearing that I wish that I had read a whole story about that instead of the book that I ended up with. Just removing everything else and just making that the core. But of course, that's not what I got when I read this story, so it's going to be rated very averagely. Number 17 is Little Woman by Louisa May Alcott. I started reading the classics late this year. Little Woman was the one that I started off with, and I haven't even seen anything related to Little Woman. It was a very cute slice of life book with a range of broad female characters with different paths and different goals. Thus, they had very well written character arcs that were finished off very beautifully. But I was not sure if there was a distinct narrative, and dialogue was used to portray the plot. Well, a lot. I don't know if that's a trope to explain so many things in classical literature in that way, but because I don't know what's good or bad in terms of classical literature, and I still liked it but not loved it, that's why I'm not rating it a 3 stars. Number 16 is The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. There were a lot of times that I didn't understand what was going on in spite of this book's beautiful imagery and characters. But in the end, everything did connect together, and that was something that I really valued, that by the end of it, I knew what was going on, and I very much appreciated the story that was going on more than I thought I would. Connected by themes of blackmail, morality, and seeing them across different characters, across different characters of different backgrounds as well. Number 15 is The Berlin Girl by Mandy Robotham, which I sometimes kept on messing up as The Berlin Girl because of Six the Musical. I'm that Berlin girl and I'm up next! I had a lot of really nice memories reading this book. That's because when I was in my final year of history in high school, I studied Kristallnacht's Night of the Broken Glass, which was an event that happened somewhere in this book. Spoilers, I guess? And it was very interesting seeing the lead up, the causes and consequences through the lens of a British female journalist making a name for herself as she goes to Berlin to be the foreign reporter there. There was a very decent feminist plotline that unfolded here, one that didn't take away from the rest of the story and was very much in the background and felt natural. That is something a lot of books can fail to do when they include a feminist subplot. However, at times it was very tell instead of show, and I think showing some of the things going on instead of telling them would have been a lot more insightful and allowed me to get very much more invested in this here novel. But I understand why it was done, I respect this decision, and I still think it was a good book all around. Number 14 was Calamity by Brandon Sanderson. I loved this series until I read this book. It's not that it was bad, it's just you could see the quality of it compared to the previous 2 books significantly decrease. People who saw my top reads of 2020 already know that Steelheart was one of my favorite books of the year. My favorite book of the year, in fact. Solely from how fast I read it and how instantly I was hooked into the story, and the characters, and the world building. But there were 2 things in this book that broke immersion, and these were two big and 2 very bad ways to break immersion. The first one was someone declaring how weird their way of living was, when in fact that's the only way they know how they lived, and so that was their normal. That is not how things are supposed to go. And the second was that, maybe a spoiler alert, to defeat the final villain, they literally did not a villain monologue, a hero monologue. A successful one! God. This made my view of the series decrease a fair bit, I'm not gonna lie, but everything else was good. I have a lot of attachments to this series, so that's why I'm definitely rating it higher. Number 13 is Secret by Bridget Kemmerer. This book was brilliant as a contemporary story. It was absolutely heartfelt, raw, genuinely made me experience a lot of warmth and attachment. But for it to being the second to last book in a fantasy series, the fantasy world building was not used a lot in this here book. Everything was very strongly connected to the overarching plot of the Merrick brothers trying to survive the guides wanting to hunt them down. But that was barely mentioned in here, only really towards the end. However, this book was still a very well-written story about coming out, and it features one of the few couples that I genuinely ship. The other one being Shrek and Fiona. Number 12 is Blood and Tempest by John Scalvran. This was the final book in the favorite series that I have read this year. It definitely wasn't the best overall series that I read this year, but I had a bunch of attachments and a lot of really, really great times and memories while reading this book. A lot of things that I liked, which largely would have been Red, who I ended up discovering I had a crush on while reading this book. Yep, I've got a book crush now. My second book crush. Yay! This book wound up to a massive convergence of power, which ended up being absolutely epic. But the part that ruined it is that this series is about the main characters down here, Hope and Red, and in the final scenes of it, they didn't really have much impact, and there were scenes where I wanted them to interact with each other way more, especially after being apart for so long. But at the same time, it makes sense because their main power was bringing all the powers together to fight off the biomancers. It was still very nice and wholesome, but it left a little bit to be wanted. So I'm not entirely mad at the way that this book ended, it's just, I'm thirsty for more Hope and Red content. And I don't think that series is popular enough to have any form of fanfiction. Number 11 is The Librarian of Auschwitz by Antonio Iturbe. I'd call the protagonist of this novel Dita the long-lost sister of the book thief, because these two had a bunch of similarities with like the way that they viewed books, the way that books were used in their narrative, in their journeys of self-discovery and coming of age. So Dita is very similar to Liesel, but Dita instead is a Jewish prisoner in the Auschwitz concentration camp. This was very poetic, heavy, and emotional, even from the whole situation of, you know, being inside these camps and being very heavily prejudiced from a very, very terrible experience in history. Because of that, I think it didn't have a strong narrative experience because it was actually based off a true story. And so it was difficult to like make a narrative that was as cohesive as all the other narratives in fiction pieces, because this here is real. Furthermore, the secondary perspectives weren't that strong, but Dita's was absolutely strong and amazing to read through. It did take a while to read, but that's just because I really wanted to digest and think on the stuff that was happening in this novel because there was just so much to it. Number 10 is Coldest War by Ian Tregillis. It has been years since I have read the first Milkweed novel, Bitter Seeds, and I thought I would be able to forget everything and find this very confusing. Luckily, it was not, but there are like some really mundane things over-explained and over-milked that sort of brought it down, but otherwise it was absolutely fantastic. The characters in this were downright incredible. The darkest novel I have read all year, but it was so good. Fantastic character perspectives in this novel. A lot of times where I felt touched, and then the very same scene or chapter after, I would end up feeling disturbed. And my favorite character in this, she's absolutely manic. Number 9 is Bane and Shadow by John Scovran. When I read the first book in this series, Hope and Red, I liked it a lot even though it was incredibly flawed, but somehow this book managed to fix up a majority of the things that I found were like flawed in that previous book, which was absolutely incredible because I know this book was published after I reviewed Hope and Red. No, before. I meant before. Lots of new characters, great world building expansions and tension, both in like political and like action things. Like if you love pirate boat naval combat, you're gonna love this. But the bad in this book was that the emotional scenes that were in there were way too short. I'm not gonna give any spoilers or anything, but like with how short some of these very super emotional scenes were, it didn't feel like they actually meant all that much in the grand scheme of things. Some of these emotional scenes barely touched a page where they should have like gone on for like 2 pages, 3 pages, in my opinion. And some of this stuff in this was predictable, but predictability isn't bad. I still had a blast with this book. Number 8 is Thunderhead by Neil Schusterman. I am getting into dystopia and I love it. Second book in the arc of the Scythe series, and it has a lot of stuff that I loved in the first book as well, which you will learn about when I review it later in this video. There were a lot of new point of views in this novel, and the reason why the book wasn't rated 5 stars was because in a lot of these points of views, I didn't know what the point of them was. And to this day, I'm a little bit like, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense, but you could have removed it just as much as well. And I wanted to see more Citra and Rowan, the protagonists of this series. However, everything else was fantastic. Character arcs, boom. World building, built and expanded in the best ways possible. Plot, amazing. Political intrigue, so spicy. One of the best parts of it was the political intrigue, actually. So much political tension, and it is so cool in this book. Oh boy, and that ending. That ending made me scared for humanity, and I kinda like the way I felt about that ending. Just having so much tension with the cliffhanger. I'm literally like about to read the final book in this series soon, and I cannot wait to finish it off. Number 7 is Gilded Ones by Namina Forna. Holy shit, I'm actually reviewed a book that was released in the same year it came out. That's a very rare occurrence for me. There are very few feminist plotlines that I like, let alone love, and I was very, very passionate about the feminist plotlines and themes in Gilded Ones. Not only that, I love the characters, the tension, the creatures, and the way everything was built in this world, which felt like both so familiar and so foreign at the same time. The diverse range of characters was fantastic as well, and only after I finished reading this novel did I learn that the author's an indie author. At least according to my research, she is. I only have a very minor complaint, and that's the action scenes being too short. Otherwise, it is stellar. I am so hyped for the Merciless Ones to be released this year. Oh my gosh, it's gonna be so good. And now we move into the 5-star books. 6 books that I rated 5 stars. Number 6 is All the King's Traitors by Keelan Rivers. The last book I reviewed for 2021, and we went off with a bang! I was instantly hooked by the world building in this and the magic system. Such an incredible take on the stereotypical elemental casting in such a unique way. I was a little bit nervous when I started discovering there were like multiple points of views, like 6 of them, 6 different characters, but each of them were written so well. You could like read those points of views. They were so rounded out, very appropriately used. I love all 6 of the POV characters. They are my children. I will protect them. And it's by another indie author tuber. This book is really great. I cannot wait for the sequel. Finished this in like 5 days. Max. It was so good. Number 5 is Firefight by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first book I started reading in 2021, and we started off with a bang! As I mentioned before, Steelheart was my favorite book of 2020, and Firefight topped it, beat it by a landslide. I loved Dave's character arc in this. I loved the world building, the flooded dystopian New York with all these different like trees and neon lights. It was genuinely the most beautiful imagery in a fantasy world that I have ever read so far. It was a very breezy read with everything expanded so beautifully. We love it. If only the final book was just as good. Number 4 is Sacrifice by Bridget Kemmerer. Now this is a perfect ending. I have been reading the Elemental series for 5 years, since I was in my second to last year of high school up until my final year of university. On average, a book a year. And this conclusion was fantastic because I genuinely felt like I had been growing up with all the characters and seeing someone who was like literally around my age, like 21, 22 years old, and reading this from an adult perspective while all the other ones from a teen perspective. It was so damn good. And literally everything was closed up perfectly. The situation with the guides, the family tensions with the Merrick brothers. I only wish that more of the characters from the earlier books in the series showed themselves more, but I still really loved how it turned out. I'm still very happy. Number 3 is Necessary Evil by Ian Tregillis. I shall be repeating myself. Now this is how you finish a series, and it's my highest ranked fantasy book. This book expertly combined the following: first person and third person in the same book. The butterfly effect, closing up character arcs. Morally gray, kinda evil, clairvoyant people. Gretel, oh my gosh, Gretel's my favorite character, and I'm so glad that we managed to explore her in the way that we did in this here novel. It is a fantastic series, but I will probably never read it again. Some of this stuff in here was so dark. I'm probably not gonna pick up this series for another 5 years because I'm not sure if I want to relive the darkness in this entire series. Number 2 is Scythe by Neil Fusseman. Why didn't I come across this book sooner? This novel subverted so much that I initially knew about the dystopian genre, and it just wound up being so incredible and insightful and just all around amazing. Of course, there was great world building and stellar characters. My favorites ended up literally switching between chapters because of how well both of the main characters, Citra and Rowan, were written. And literally, as soon as I finished this book, I knew that this is gonna be one of my favorite series. I bought the rest of the series as soon as I closed this here book. Apparently this is gonna be turned into a movie, and I am so here for it. And the number 1 book for 2021. It's a contemporary novel. It's by one of my favorite authors, the author who wrote my favorite book of all time. It's The Messenger by Marcus Zusak. Contemporary is a big hit or miss for me, because sometimes in contemporary the events can be written as either too melodramatic or seriously undersold. But this book is a freaking hit and a half, mate! It literally humanized every character, which there was a lot of. Off the top of my head, I think there was like 16 named relevant characters to this novel. And I fell in love with every single one of them. They are all so precious. They're all such precious people. So great, and it's full of so much of the stuff that I fell in love with when I read The Book Thief. So to finish it off, if you're going to be adding any book from the books that I have recommended to your TBR for this year, or however long your TBR extends to, it's gotta be this one. If you are still here, congratulations on making it this far, because I know this video is going to be long. I literally hit the record button like 2 or 3 times recording this video, and it has literally taken me an hour to film. Please let me know in the comments if you have read any of these books this year and what your thoughts on them were as well. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you are new around here. You can ring that bell to find out when I post more creative content and give me a little Happy New Year blessing of a couple more subscribers closer to 100. If you're looking for another fantastic book to add to your to be read, Asher's Coder Exposure is for you. Perfect for fans of Men in Black, but instead it's with fantasy worlds and fantasy creatures as Abby Tacker finds her place within the mix of this. And of course you can check in my description for my Instagram, my Fiverr, my TikTok, and my website. Stay creative, everybody, and I'll be seeing you in the next video.